Nice. When I put the one thing size, I don't know, 70 grams. But hi everyone, a little bit of an intro there just to get everybody's blood going. I get a little bit, I guess, and get you in the right mindset for a discussion on maybe how to squeeze a bit more speed out of your plane, or you know, selecting a plane that that might be a little bit faster. I'm not going to go too terribly in detail about power setups. I'm going to have a lot of links to other videos and some blog posts, my motor test spreadsheet, all that sort of stuff. You know, you don't necessarily have to, you know, I mean, obviously I've been trying out all these quad racing motors in the last several months, different props, speed controllers. You know, that's kind of a thing that I really get a lot of enjoyment out of. But, you know, there's a lot of ways you can squeeze, get a faster plane just by selecting the right plane and then building it, finishing it. You know, even with the same power setup, you'd be amazed at how much speed you can get. And then even with the same power setup, depending on how versatile it is, you can experiment with some different props, things like that, to get a little bit more speed. So, you know, going back to my main philosophy in this hobby is, you know, a lot of it boils down to what you can get, what you can afford, and you know, how you want your planes to perform. I mean, you don't necessarily might not necessarily want your planes to fly as fast as mine, or whatever else. So a lot of these things I'm going to talk about today are not things that, you know, I came up with on my own. They're things I learned from the RC Powers forum, YouTube, watching what other people have done, trying those, experimenting. That's the nice thing about these foam scratch built park jets, is that, you know, you can do all kinds of experimentation. Really the only limit is your imagination, I suppose. So today I'm just going to share with you you know, a lot of my experiences on selecting the right plane, some build techniques that have worked well for me, and then maybe touch just a little bit on power setups. So I think you have to ask yourself, you know, be honest with yourself, sort of, you know, where are you in your progression in the hobby, in park jets, whatever else. You know, one of the, if you've watched my top 10 biggest mistakes I made in the park jet journey, one of my biggest mistakes was trying to run before I could walk. So you want to be careful. I mean, I know it sometimes, and I've fallen into this trap, sometimes it's very, very tempting to, you know, be flying around for quite a while, and you know, maybe your plane you're getting a little bit bored with it, and you want to make a big jump in speed. So you know, there are ways where you can progress, because believe me, you know, just increasing, you know, even with all the flying that I've done, sometimes just increasing the speed on your plane by 10 to 15% makes it a whole different animal, you know, based on your throws, your expo, all that sort of stuff. So you don't want to jump from like a, you know, a 3-cell 2212 2200 setup to a 4-cell you know, 2750 kV park jet, or a quad racing motor setup. It's, you know, you want to make the progression a bit more logical. So again, I'll have links to some videos on different motors, you know, that you could experiment with without spending a whole lot of money that, you know, you might find gives you the speed that you're looking for. Okay, so I don't have a wind tunnel, you know, obviously to give you all kinds of facts and theories and videos and all that sort of stuff on all these little techniques. Essentially, I just, you know, from experience and a lot of experimentation, and then taking it out to, you know, possibly the best lab in the world, just taking it out to the field and flying my planes, I found that these selections of planes and techniques have have worked really well for me when I'm looking to get, you know, a fast setup in my park jets. So number one thing is you know, picking the right weapon, so to speak. You know, there's lots of park jets available out there, but if you really want to give yourself the best, I think the best chance of having a good fast setup, you want to narrow down your choices. MiG-29 style, I mean, this is a MiG-35, but MiG-29 style airframes, Su-27 style airframes, F-15s, I've flown a couple F-15s. Those all tend to be pretty fast airplanes. You know, they have sort of the same wing sweep. They're also very stable at speed, which is something you want. You know, you don't want a plane that the minute you hammer the throttle, it's, you know, it gets squirrely and it's juking and jiving around. You know, you want a plane that's, you know, when you hammer the throttle, it's just going to go straight forward and you know, allow you to enjoy the speed rather than scaring the living daylights out of yourself every single time. The T-50 and the F-22, the current version 5s, those are both very fast planes. Overall, maybe not quite as stable. So if you're just getting into maybe your first, you know, really fast setup, I would say go with, you know, RC Powers. Traditionally, their MiG airframes have always been, you know, their MiG-29 version 3, version 4. You know, they were billed as, you know, the fastest of their fleet. So these are, this is a good versatile. The Su-27 and F-15 are good versatile airframes that you know, can handle a bit of extra weight depending on what motor setup you want to go for, the speed, and they tend to stay stable when you get going pretty fast. So the other thing I would say is that I found in my experience is that those 3 planes I mentioned, they have twin tails, and although that might cause a little bit more drag in the back here, going for an airplane, say like the F-16, which has a single fin down the center, what I found is that that fin tends to break up the prop wash quite a bit, and it tends to reduce the effectiveness of the power, the thrust coming off of the prop. So that's something else to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is, you know, just look at the airframe in general. For example, like an F-35 style airframe, it tends to be fairly blocky, and you know, any ones that I've ever flown, they tend to be a bit more draggy. I know that's not a real word, but so it doesn't really matter how much power you put behind that. You'd get to a point where the drag of the airframe is just going to overpower whatever thrust you're trying to turn out on your motor. The other thing sometimes too is that planes that have a more straight wing, like an F-18 for example, not that the F-18 is a real dog, but they can also get, you can also approach, hit the sort of drag boundary a little bit faster. Size also matters. You know, I find that for most park jet motors, in my experience, most of the planes that I build are in the sort of 27-inch wingspan range, and then weight, again, another factor, big factor. I find around 19 to 21 ounces works best for me. It gives me good stability, good presence in the air, and I'm still able to have a pretty fast plane. Obviously, you can go lighter than that, but then, you know, if you're flying in any kind of wind, you have to be really careful, and you can end up with some stability issues. Okay, so we've selected our airframe, let's say. Okay, so, you know, MiG Su-27, F-15. I mean, there's others, but I think, in my experience, if you really want to narrow it down to have some good speed, those are 3 of the best airframes I've found. So in this airplane, and I've shot a video using this as sort of my training aid, where I talked about my new build philosophy. If you can experiment with some foams that are a little bit thinner, for example, this one was built, the fuselage and the wing plate is built out of Dollar Tree foam or Adams Ready Board, and I know that that's not readily available in a lot of places around the world, but you know, if you can get some slightly thinner foam, like even a millimeter thinner than the standard 6mm Depron or model plane foam. The first time I built one of these planes completely out of Dollar Tree foam, I was blown away right away just by the reduction in drag and how much faster the plane was. You know, even at the same weight and same power setups that I've been using in previous planes made with 6mm foam. So that's one thing, you know, you can experiment right away to help reduce your drag. You'd be amazed at, you know, just reducing the drag profile of the fuselage and the thickness of the wing by 10% or even a little bit more. Just makes a huge difference in the performance of the plane. I like to build my planes obviously light. You want to build light, but you also want to build, you know, build them strong enough. I mean, especially if you're building a plane that's going to go fast, you know, you don't want to go so overboard on building it light that, you know, the first time you hammer the throttle, your vertical stabilizers come flying off or your wing folds up. And this takes a little bit of experience, you know, kind of knowing how strong is strong enough and how light is light enough to get a really fast airframe. So again, that's something that you need to experiment with. I tend to like to try and get my planes, really as smooth and as sleek up in the front part here as I possibly can. I'm looking to try and keep the airflow as clean and as smooth as possible for as long as possible. As soon as the airflow is going to get turbulent back here, when it hits the prop and some other things. As soon as the airflow starts to get a little bit turbulent, it starts to cause drag, and it'll slow your plane down, and it'll also could cause you stability issues. So the smoother you can keep your airframe and keep the airflow going across your plane for the longest possible, I found works the best. So up here on the nose and the canopy here, I've sanded it nice and smooth. I've filled the grooves, left behind by the score and fold build technique. I've used just some super lightweight spackle. You can also use, I know a lot of people use like just thin bits of foam, glue it in there with a lightweight glue, and then sand it down. But anything, believe me, a good sanding job, although it's messy and fussy, and I'll have a link below to a video where I talk about how I finish and paint my planes. It's worth it. I mean, you do, on average, on a plane this size, 27-inch wingspan, I normally have reduced the total weight by about 15 to 20 grams with a good sanding job, and then reducing the drag as well. I like to use, moving back, I also sand the leading and trailing edges. I taper the leading and trailing edges of all my stabilizers, horizontal and vertical, my control surfaces, elevons, rudders, the trailing edge of my wing and my ailerons, the leading edge of my prop slot, trailing edge of my prop slot, everything I can do there to help to reduce drag. I also sand these leading edges of the nacelles, any square edges here I like to just round off, try and get the plane as absolutely smooth and sleek as possible going through the air. I found that works out really, really well. I find for speed planes, and just generally for me anyway, I fly all my planes with KF4 airfoils. I use the same thickness of foam top and bottom. I find that this, I use kind of like a sharp leading edge that goes right down the center of the actual wing plate. I know there's a lot of arguments for and against that, and a lot of people like the rounded, more rounded leading edge, and that's fine. I just found that this sort of sharp leading edge has worked best for me. Excuse me. And also, most designers now with planes like this MiG, where the KF airfoil extends just on the top, not on the bottom, forward along the leading edge root extension, or the lurks. What you'll find there is that it just helps that airflow transition and stay nice and smooth. Gives the nose a bit more, makes the nose, the flying performance feel smoother, and I find gives a bit more stability to the nose. So extending that forward. The size of the KF is also important in my experiments, and this is something you can experiment with. I found that about 40%, having the KF no more than 40% of the total wing chord works out the best for me anyway. When I was a test pilot for NAMC and we were testing the first variant of the MiG-35, we had KFs that were about 45%, and they tended to cause more drag. And the other thing is that if you got going fast and you needed to pull up in the pitch, especially if the KFs are too big, it'll slow down that response in the pitch. So about 40% seems to work out the best. I've experimented with them a little bit smaller. I get to a point where they don't, for me anyway, they don't provide the stability that I'm looking for. KFs provide a lot of stability. KF4s provide a lot of stability at speed, help with wind penetration or air penetration as you're going fast. So those work out really, really well. Some other things, and I've talked about this, you can lighten up your plane. Most planes this size and weight that I talked about, 27-inch wingspan, 19 to 21 ounces. I've managed to lighten them up even more by using 5-gram nylon gear servos for my rudders and my ailerons. I know you could just get rid of those and fly elevons only. 99% of most park jets fly great with elevons only if you're just going for pure speed. But I'm looking for more, you know, of a fully functional plane where I have speed and the ability, if I don't want to fly super fast, to still be able to do, you know, lots of aerobatics and other flying. But anyway, those are ways that you can lighten things up as well. I also like to keep, I mean, the design of this MiG-35 runs the linkages to the outside of the rudders anyway. You know, if you're not using rudders, it's not a factor. But I like to modify any planes and keep this area in here in the inside of the vertical stabilizer as smooth as possible. So I put the beveled part of my hinge on the outside and my linkages just to keep, you know, have as little disturbance as possible of the prop wash coming off of the prop for as long as possible. I mean, obviously once it gets back to your elevons and those are moving around, then the prop wash is going to get disturbed. But I find it just gives a bit cleaner and smoother transition of the prop wash over the back of the airplane. Okay, so there's the airframe. You know, if you do nothing else, if you're looking, even if you kept the same power setup, I think if you do nothing else, if you've never experimented with, you know, with sanding and keeping, you know, getting all these leading and trailing edges tapered, you know, give that a try, because I think you'll be amazed that just that change alone will make your airframe feel faster. So when you're going for speed, I think there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. You know, you can build a plane that's just, you know, you just want that, you know, flat out dragster speed, you know, water your eyes, impress everybody at the field kind of flat out speed, you know, with elevons only and, you know, that sort of thing, or for more functional speed. You know, when I was first experimenting with really fast speed setups, I used to use this. This is an NTM prop drive 2836 2700 kV motor. It's kind of like the V8 of park jet motors, paired up with a 60 amp speed controller. And you know, you can run this on 4S. I mean, it's a real beast. And you know, I've had planes on 4S with a 6x4 prop up over 100 miles an hour, which is pretty scary. You know, you see something that's made out of glue and foam that you've made yourself go smoking by at 100 miles an hour, I tell you, to get your attention. But what I found was that, you know, the planes ended up being fairly heavy, you know, 4 or 5 ounces heavier even than what this one is. And as a result, the wing loading was so much higher that even flying around, you know, not doing high speed runs or, you know, vertical climb outs, I had to fly the plane a lot faster, and it didn't feel as light and as nimble on the sticks. So trying to do any other kind of aerobatics was a lot more challenging. So I sort of ended up with a, you know, like almost like a raw speed plane, and then other planes that, you know, if I wanted to just go out and do aerobatics and yanking and banking. But since I've experimented with, you know, keeping either the same weight of motor, like the 2200 or 2212, 2200, or even 2700, you know, you can get more speed while keeping the plane a lot lighter. You know, with these quad racing motors, you know, the difference here, like this is a quad racing motor, 45 amp speed controller. The difference between these two right alone is like 2.5 to 3 ounces. And then normally I found, because I had, you know, more weight just in that power, that power system, I ended up having to reinforce my plane quite a bit more, excuse me, so that it would stay together. So, you know, that drives up your wing loading. The nice thing, again, about experimenting with these quad racing motors is I've found combinations where I've really, you know, like this is the GEP-RC 2306 2750 that I've just recently tested. This is by far the fastest quad racing motor, and I would have to say on 3S the fastest power setup that I've ever tested. But there are other quad racing motors that I've tested, and again I'll have links that are cheaper and still provide really good power. So, you know, and are much lighter. You know, the motor alone is like 20 grams lighter than 20 to 30 grams almost lighter than these 2200 motors. So right away you lighten up your plane quite a bit. So, you know, those are factors to think about. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, you know, having that plane that's just an absolute dragster, you know, goes 100 miles an hour in a straight line. But then again, there are other options that if you want to just have an overall really versatile plane that'll have lots of speed, when you're feeling your oats and you want to hammer the coals to it. A lot of these quad racing motors now as well, I think with the right prop, would be good candidates to drop a 4-cell battery in there and then really light your hair on fire. So lots of different options available. But like I said, picking the right airframe to start with, and then keeping it light but keeping it strong. Taking the extra time to do all those little finishing techniques with the sanding and all that sort of stuff. Right away, you're going to notice a difference, even if you keep the same power setup. So anyway, so there we go, folks. That's kind of my some of my ideas and philosophies. If you're looking for a really you want to build a faster plane, just the plane alone, and then like I said, you can experiment with different speed setups. I'll have the motor test spreadsheet, linked down below. You can kind of browse through there and see. Like I said, there's some pretty reasonably priced quad racing motors where you'll save yourself quite a bit of weight and not have to spend a lot of money on a motor. So I hope this has been helpful, in your quest or your desire to fill your need for speed. These, again, a lot of these ideas are not mine, but I've played around with them and experimented with them, and I encourage you to do that. I mean, that's the nice thing about these scratch-built foam planes is that you can do all kinds of experimenting, and it doesn't cost you a whole lot to play around with different build techniques, different things, ideas. Just let your imagination take you wherever you want, and just remember, it's not a contest, it's not a race. It's what makes you happy when you're out at the field, I think, is the most important thing. So thanks very much for watching. Again, please check out the comments down below. I'll have links to lots more info there that might help you out in your filling your need for speed. Thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.